The rain's visitor. The rain started as a soft drizzle in the late afternoon, growing heavier as night fell. Samantha, sitting alone in her small house on the edge of the woods, welcomed the rain. It had always been a source of comfort for her. The rhythmic patter on the windows and roof helped her relax, making the house feel warm and safe. By the time evening rolled in, the storm had grown stronger. The wind held, and the rain pounded against the house like fingers tapping on the windows. Samantha wrapped herself in a blanket, trying to read a book, but the sounds of the storm outside were distracting. Every gust of wind seemed to push against the walls of her house, making them creak and groan. She glanced at the clock. It was almost midnight. The storm was too intense for her to focus, so she decided to head to bed. She put her book down and stood up, about to turn off the lights, when a sharp knock echoed through the house. Knock, knock. Samantha froze. It wasn't the wind this time. Someone was knocking at the door. She turned slowly to face the front door, her heart starting to beat faster. Who would be out here in this kind of weather? Her house was far from the nearest neighbor, and the storm had been raging for hours. Knock, knock. The knock came again, a little louder, more insistent. She walked to the door, her footsteps quiet, unsure of what to expect. She peeked through the small window beside the door, but there was nothing outside, just darkness and rain. The wind whipped the trees, making the shadows dance in the yard. She hesitated, then slowly unlocked the door and opened it a crack. Cold rain sprayed her face as she peered out into the storm. No one was there. Samantha stepped out onto the porch, shivering as the rain soaked her skin. She looked around, squinting into the night, but the yard was empty. Just the sound of rain hitting the ground and the distant rustling of the wind through the trees. She quickly stepped back inside, closed the door, and locked it again. Her hands were shaking. She was sure she'd heard the knocking. As she turned to go back upstairs, the knock came again. Knock, knock. It came from the back door this time. Samantha's heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't heard anyone walking around the house, and there was no way anyone could move that fast in this storm. She slowly moved toward the back of the house, her footsteps cautious. When she reached the kitchen, she saw the back door was slightly open, rain dripping in from the gap. She was certain she had locked it earlier. Her pulse quickened as she approached the door. She pushed it open fully and stepped out onto the back porch, shining her flashlight into the yard. Nothing. No footprints. No sign of anyone. Just the steady downpour of rain and the tree swaying in the wind. She rushed back inside, slamming the door shut and locking it tightly this time. Her mind raced. Who, or what, could be knocking in this storm? She tried to calm herself down, telling herself it was just the wind or her imagination playing tricks. But just as she started to turn away, the knocking came again. Knock, knock. It echoed through the house, this time from the front door again. It was louder, more urgent, like someone, or something, wanted to get inside. Samantha's hands shook as she backed away from the door, her eyes wide with fear. She had no idea what to do. She grabbed her phone to call for help, but there was no signal. The storm had knocked out the lines, and she was completely cut off. Suddenly, the lights flickered, then went out, plunging the house into darkness. Samantha stood still, her breath shaky, listening to the rain hammering against the windows. For a moment, all she could hear was the storm, but then, from somewhere inside the house, she heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't a knock this time. It was the sound of footsteps. The tapping grew louder, coming from the hallway behind her. Samantha's heart raced as she turned, trying to shine her flashlight down the hall, but the beam flickered weakly. The footsteps stopped. The house was silent now, except for the rain. Samantha stood frozen, listening. She heard a faint, soft whisper, barely louder than the storm outside. Samantha. Her blood ran cold. The voice was low, raspy, and close. Too close. Her flashlight flickered once more and then went out completely, leaving her in total darkness. She could feel the presence, something lurking in the shadows, watching her. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the knocking stopped. But the rain? The rain kept falling. The rain began softly, a gentle tap-tap-tap on Lily's windows as the evening settled in. She sat alone in her cabin, deep in the woods, surrounded by towering trees that whispered in the wind. She had always loved the sound of rain. It was calming, soothing, like a lullaby from nature itself. But tonight, something about it felt different. The rain grew heavier, pounding on the roof like fingers drumming. Lily tried to focus on her book, but a sense of unease crept in, making her shift in her chair. As she turned the page, a loud knock echoed from the front door. Her heart skipped a beat. No one should be out in this storm. No one ever visited her cabin. Cautiously, she approached the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. She opened it a crack, the cold rain blowing in her face. But there was no one there. Only darkness and the sound of rain pouring down, hammering the earth. Shivering, she closed the door and turned back toward the living room. Then, she noticed it, a puddle of water, right in the middle of the floor. Her breath caught in her throat. The door had been locked all night. How could there be water inside? Her pulse quickened as she followed the trail of wet footprints leading away from the puddle. They weren't her footprints. They were large, soaked, and heading deeper into her house. The steady sound of the rain outside made everything seem eerily quiet, as if the storm itself was holding its breath. Lily. The whisper cut through the sound of rain like a blade. Her heart pounded in her chest as she spun around, searching the empty room. The voice had been soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. Someone, or something, was inside. She backed up slowly, her mind racing. The only sound was the relentless rain, tapping against the windows, as if trying to warn her. She reached for her phone, but there was no signal, just the endless hum of static. The storm had cut her off. The footprints led to the bedroom door, which stood slightly ajar, swaying ever so gently. Lily. The whisper came again, closer this time, like it was right behind her. She grabbed a lamp, holding it up like a weapon, her breath shaky and uneven. As she moved toward the bedroom, the rain grew louder, drowning out everything else. The door creaked open slowly, and she saw a shadow in the dim light, standing in the corner. It was tall, almost too tall, its head nearly scraping the ceiling. Lily. The voice said once more, but this time, she could see its source. The figure turned, revealing hollow, dark eyes, staring right at her. Water dripped from its soaked clothes, forming a puddle around its feet. Her legs felt frozen in place, her mind screaming to run, but she couldn't move. The figure stepped toward her, its feet splashing in the growing puddle. The rain outside pounded harder, as if the storm itself was desperate to get inside. You didn't listen to the rain's warning, it whispered, its voice echoing inside her head. Suddenly, the windows shattered, and rain poured into the cabin, flooding the floor, rising higher and higher. The figure disappeared beneath the water, and the room was engulfed in darkness. Lily gasped, but before she could scream, the water swallowed her too. And the rain never stopped. When the storm finally passed, the cabin stood silent. But the next time it rained, if you listened closely, you could still hear it, the soft whisper of Lily's name, carried on the wind, forever lost in the rain.